Okay. Where do I put these now? Those will fall later and give us something to talk about. All right.
CGQ Plus.
So today is June 30th, and that means I barely managed to record a new episode of Flashback in the month of June because the last one was in May. And, well, this obviously won't be out until July, but that's okay. I got to be honest and say, I cannot for the life of me remember what we talked about on the last episode of Flashback, but that's okay because I've known ever since I recorded the last episode what I was going to talk about this time. So I think we're all right. Now, before the show started, we had some technical difficulties in that the floor right where I'm standing was creaking really, really badly. And, I mean, there was the chance we might have to cancel the show entirely because I can't keep doing this with a creaky floor. But I just got down on my hands and knees and found the exact spot where it was creaking and just hit it a few times with my fist. And I kind of heard something, seemed like it was settling back into place. And now it's not creaking anymore. So, and then the other thing that I'll bring this up just because you may either hear or see a difference. And if you follow the show on Twitter or you're already a patron, then you already know this. But we got a new microphone. And not only a new microphone, but also a new audio interface / recorder. So, usually with these shows, I either have a lapel mic clipped to my, lapel, this isn't a lapel, I guess, just clipped to my shirt. Or I have, the big microphone sitting right about here. And now there's no microphone in the frame. And that is because right barely out of frame there is a shotgun microphone that's aimed right at my mouth. And hopefully it sounds all right. I primarily bought this microphone for doing the voiceover for the other channel. But when I bought this microphone, it was really with the idea that it was going to become the only microphone that I use on the show, so that I could bring it up here and have it set up right here for doing this kind of stuff. I guess not for doing live streams. I already have a setup I like for the live streams, but this is the first thing that I've bought with Patreon money. So big thanks to all the patrons out there. I opened the Patreon campaign and then just didn't touch the money until I had enough to buy this stuff. So hopefully it sounds better. I think it sounds better, and I guess that's what's kind of important. But so anyway, thanks to everybody. Now, I said I already knew what I was going to talk about today. This is an exciting show. I should have put, at the beginning of the episode, something like, on a very special episode of CGQ Flashback, but I didn't do that. In 8th and 9th grade, Stuart was really the only friend I had, right? I kind of moved off of Jonathan. I've always been a one friend guy. I don't know what the reason is for that. And then now that I'm married, I don't really have any friends. I have friends, but I don't really spend time with my friends because my wife's that's enough. I don't need more people than that. But, before I had a wife, I always just had one guy friend. And in 8th and 9th grade, it was Stuart. And Stuart used to spend the night at my house a lot. Not a lot, but I mean, if I had my way, he would have spent that at my house every Friday and Saturday night. But sometimes his dad was an odd duck. He would ask his dad, can I, stay over at Chris's tonight? And his dad would say no. And he's like, well, he would ask why, but not in a petulant why, but just well, for what reason? Just because there wasn't anything going on, and his dad would just be like, oh, we're doing family time tomorrow or something, even though they weren't. But sorry, I got an eyelash in my eye or something. And but even with that being the case, I mean, Stuart and I spent a ton of time together. But as I think I mentioned in the last episode, we went to the same junior high school for 8th grade, but in 9th grade, we went to different schools. And so we no longer really got to see each other as often during the week. So it was awesome when one of us could stay over at the other person's house on a Friday night or a Saturday night. And more often than not, he would stay the night at my house. And I think that's probably because, generally speaking, My mom wasn't home on Friday and Saturday nights. And my grandma was like a night owl. Like my grandma stayed up until like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So there was no worry about us staying up late and getting in trouble or keeping somebody up. Because, however late we stayed up, we were still probably going to tap out before my grandma did. Like my grandma stayed up until like 1 or 2 in the morning, like just reading and watching TV. And then she'd go to bed, and then she wouldn't wake up until like 9 o'clock in the morning, which, worked out for me because then I could stay up late, like I said, without worrying about waking anybody else up. So, but every once in a while, we'd stay the night over at Stuart's house too. Obviously we'd play computer games. He would often bring stuff over, like I talked about in a previous episode, that hand scanner that we used to hand scan some Playboy centerfolds. And, maybe he would get new games at school. He would often get like floppy copies of games from other kids at school. So he'd bring those over and we'd install them on my computer. Obviously, we'd watch a lot of TV. If he came over like on a Saturday night, we'd probably watch something like Cops. One thing we always watched, though, was, and I'll talk about TV shows more in a later episode, but we always watched Star Trek The Next Generation. In fact, he was the one that actually got me into that show. Or maybe it was his mom, really. I don't know. When I was growing up, my mom watched the original Star Trek because they would show it, they would show reruns on like Saturday afternoons or something, and she would always watch that if she was home. But, and I'd watch it with her, but I was a little bit younger then, and maybe it was just not for me. And when The Next Generation came on, like I knew it was on, but I just like, for some reason, I never really gave it a fair shake. But Stuart was really into it, and Stuart's mom was really into it, because I remember she'd be in the kitchen cooking, and she had a little like 12-inch black and white TV, much like the one I had in my room, set up on the kitchen counter, and she'd be watching Star Trek The Next Generation while she was cooking dinner. And that's what really got me into it, I think, is one time I was kind of sitting there in the kitchen while she was cooking and I was watching the show, and for some reason that made me want to get into the show, or that's what finally hooked me on the show. And so we would watch that, but one of the biggest things that I remember us always doing when he would come over is there was this Texaco station, like a gas station, that was walking distance from my house. Like it was at like one of the nearest busy intersections. And in fact, it was on my way to school when I was in junior high, or I kind of made it on my way to school. I could have gone a different way, but I used to ride my bike past that gas station every morning. And I went through like this streak for a while where I would stop there every morning before school and I would buy a bag of chili cheese Fritos. And like, that's what I would eat for breakfast. Cause then I would get back on my bike and I would have the bag open and I was like shaking them into my mouth while I was riding to school. And I don't know what got me. I don't even know how I got started eating chili cheese Fritos, but whatever. But anyway, if Stuart spent the night, generally we would walk over there at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And what I would always do is I would go to my grandma. And I've said before, my grandma was not really into giving me money just because she didn't want to spoil me or whatever. But, I would basically tell her, oh, we're going to go to Texaco and, can I get you something? And it was all like a dog and pony show, right? Because what ended up happening, she would want me to get her some bonbons, which were like these Nestle little ice cream balls that were just dipped in chocolate. So think of like an Eskimo pie that's like bite-sized. And she would give me like a $5 bill and would let me keep the change, basically, which basically meant I could get $5 from her. Stuart and I could go to Texaco, and whatever money was not going towards her bonbons, we could spend on other junk foods. We would get like some sodas and some Fritos or something. And then we would walk back to my house and then, go back to playing games or whatever we were doing. And that just became like this routine anytime we spent the night. So, I'm sure half the time my grandma didn't want the bonbons, but I just think my grandma always wanted to give me money, but she didn't want to spoil me. So I couldn't just ask for money. So I feel like for her, it was like, well, this is this system where I'm giving him money, but only because he's picking something up for me. And that way she could kind of feel like she wasn't spoiling me or something. That's the only thing I can think. But I don't know why that's just like my biggest memory of that. I actually have a lot of pictures from when Stuart used to spend the night, because I kind of got into photography for a while because my mom bought me a used camera, and by that time we had a Costco membership, and so she was buying film because she also had a camera, and she'd let me have some, and so I've got like a box of old photos around here, and I've shown a couple on the show before, but I don't want to show pictures of Stuart just because he's not here to okay that, but like one picture I have, going back to the Star Trek thing, I have this picture of him sitting on the couch in my family room with like, anybody out there remember the Star Trek trading cards? He has like one in each hand. He's going like, like that or something. They sold these trading cards where, and I don't remember who made them. It wasn't Topps. It was like Fleer or Don Russ or one of the other card companies. And like half the set was original series cards, and those had like a dark blue border. And the other half of the set were next generation cards, and those had like a maroon border. And we used to buy those just because we liked Star Trek so much. And I just remember, I think we had just bought some. We were going through them, and I took his picture, and so he just like hammed it up or whatever by showing it off. But I'm telling the story about him spending the night in my house for a reason. But we have to take a little detour first. Now, I've talked about before how Stuart kind of turned me on to this idea that you could, go do odd jobs around your neighborhood and make money. And there was this guy that lived like right around the corner from him. I can't remember the guy's name, so I, say his name's Mike. I don't know. And he gets a job working for this Mike guy where like he's going over there like almost every night. And because I think sometimes I don't want to hey man, can you hang in? It's like, oh no, I got to work or whatever. And so I didn't know this was a thing, but this guy had this business just that he ran out of his garage, leasing like commercial coffee machines to restaurants and diners and whatnot. Like you go to like a Denny's, or I don't go to Denny's, but whatever. And there's like that Bun brand, BUNN Bun brand, and there'll be like the coffee carafe that's underneath the brewer thing, and then there's the second one that's on top on the hot plate. And a lot of restaurants will have a few of these lined up, like, regular decaf or something like that. And I mean, I guess without even thinking about it, I would just always assume that the restaurant would own that like they owned anything else. But I guess they didn't, because this guy's business was leasing these machines to whatever restaurant or business. And then he would come drop off and pick up the actual glass carafes. Like they would use them for, I don't know, let's say a week. And then they would end up with like hard water stains and coffee stains in them. And so he would make the rounds to all these restaurants where he would pick up like the dirty carafes and then drop off like a case or whatever of clean ones. And then he would get paid. And it seemed like he was running an all cash operation. So maybe he was staying under the radar of the IRS. I don't really know. But Stuart's job was to clean all of these coffee pots. And, he used like CLR, I think, or one of those, like an Amway compound or something, or product or whatever. I don't remember, but, he would sit there and this guy, Mike, paid him like $4 per case. And I think a case had like 4 or 6 of these coffee pots in them. But I mean, he really had to scrub them, because he would scrub them and make them look like new. Because you can imagine if you're a customer at a diner and someone is serving you coffee out of some grungy coffee pot, you're not really going to like that. So that's why I guess they always wanted to have these nice crystal clear coffee pots. And but this guy didn't want to do that himself, so he would just get Stuart to do it. And so Stuart would go over there and do a couple cases a night or whatever, and get paid. And the funny thing is that the guy paid him in ones all the time. And you could imagine this was like the very early 90s. This was like the winter of 91, 92. So not everybody was carrying credit cards around, and if you did, you maybe couldn't use them at a place like that. We all just paid cash for things back then. And that would include the tip. So you can imagine that these restaurants had a lot of cash. You can imagine that the servers, when they got off of their shift, probably had a huge wad of $1 bills that they would want to go change out in the register for like, 5s and 10s and 20s. And you can probably imagine that the restaurant would want the ones that they would have change. And so I guess these restaurants were mostly paying this guy in ones. And so he would turn around and pay Stuart in ones. And Stuart was saving up all this money. And so I remember in his room, he had like this big, what are they called? Like gorilla racks or something? They used to sell them at Costco. They probably still do. You know, it's like those metal framed shelves that they're kind of like Tinker Toys. They kind of snap together without tools. And then you put like what is that fiberboard? I can't remember the name of that stuff. That like that pressed wood. That's not, you know, it's like made out of wood dust or whatever. Shelves. And he had those in his room. I had some in my room too, because it was like $25 for this huge shelving unit. And so it was cheap. And so he had that in his room. And on the very top shelf, he had this little white cardboard box. And that's where he kept all the money he was saving from this guy. And he had them like bundled up, like in bundles of 20. So you'd open this box and there was all this cash in there, but it was all just ones. And but he was saving it up because in March, he had his birthday. And this would have been 92. So that would have been his 15th birthday. My 15th birthday was coming up just a few months later. And I don't know if he had some kind of deal with his parents where they helped him, or I don't know. I mean, because I remember it having something to do with his birthday. So that I think maybe, like I said, Stuart's family didn't have a lot of money, but maybe for his birthday, they were going to give him like $40 or something. I have no idea. But all I know is that on Stuart's birthday, he took all the money he'd saved up washing coffee pots, and he took, I guess, you know, whatever happened with his birthday money, and he went to the electronics store and he bought a Sega Genesis. And I had seen a Sega Genesis before, like at Toys R Us. I'm sure I'd even played one, you know, at a demo kiosk. But, you know, at this time, Stuart and I were both like hardcore into PC gaming. But it wasn't like it is now. Like now, I feel like if you have a PC and you're primarily PC gaming, you're not really missing out that much if you don't have a console. Especially if those consoles are a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox One. I think there's a lot more unique software on the Nintendo Switch, just because it's mostly, you know, Nintendo IP. But back then, it was like two completely different worlds, right? There weren't games that like cross-platform between home computers. And when I say that, I should say like DOS-based, like PC clone home computers. There wasn't a lot of overlap between that and a home console. Obviously, if you had something like an Amiga, then, you know, some Genesis games might be coming out that you were familiar with. But we didn't have that. So we both had PCs. So while we had some awesome games to play on the PC, you know, things like the NES had completely different games. And then the Genesis came out, and that, of course, had completely different games. And, you know, neither of us had sound cards in our computers yet. At this time, so that was another big thing. We still just had like the bleeps and bloops of the PC speaker, whereas, you know, even an NES sounds better than a P. I mean, I think anything sounds better than a PC speaker, right? I mean, a Commodore 64 sounded better than a PC speaker, or maybe even an Apple II GS with like a Mockingbird in it. I mean, anyway, so there was that, but also like all the platform games and whatnot that would come out on home consoles were not something that you really saw on home computer, especially obviously not, you know, first party games like, you know, the Mario type games and whatnot. And so that's why I brought up Stuart spending the night at my house, because, you know, one Friday or Saturday night, Stuart came over and he brought his Genesis. And certainly this is the first time I'd ever sort of seen a Genesis like in person, like not, you know, behind glass at like Toys R Us. And the only game he had was the game that came with it, which was the pack-in game, Sonic the Hedgehog. Again, this was in March of 92. So Altered Beast had long been replaced as the pack-in game, but these were still the Model 1 Genesis systems that said high definition graphics over the dome. But this must have been the very end of that, before the first redesign where they got rid of the high definition graphics. And then I think it was the year after that the Model 2 came out. But anyway, he brought that over and we hooked it up. You know, I had a big wooden console TV that was my grandparents' out in the family room, and we hooked up the Genesis to that, and that was for sure the first time that I ever saw Sonic the Hedgehog. Like I had played Genesis, I think at Toys R Us, and seen like Altered Beast, and I don't know what else I might have seen, but for sure I had never seen Sonic the Hedgehog before, and I was absolutely blown away by it, because again, I mean, just the speed and the sound were like nothing I'd seen ever on a computer, and certainly not seen on the Nintendo. And I still remember the first time playing through just the first level of Sonic, and just being blown away by how great it was, and thinking right then, I got to get one of these, a Genesis. And so, yeah, so I remember sitting there playing the game, and you know, Stuart, you know, I've said this before, he's a patient guy and he's a generous guy. And so, you know, he was the kind of guy where he would just kind of maybe let me play the game without constantly being like, hey, no, my turn, let me go, you know, give it to me, level or life or whatever. He would just kind of let me sit there and play with the game. And, you know, I remember I got stuck on the first stage or whatever of the Marble Zone, which is Marble Zone's the second zone, and then the first stage of the second zone. It's funny because it's like the only puzzle really in the entire game, when Sonic has to push that big boulder or whatever into that little slot to hold down the button that brings up that big spiky thing. It's a weird thing that the game has that, because other than that, there are no puzzles. But I remember I couldn't figure out to do that, because it didn't even occur to me that Sonic could push something. You know, I think I've said before that Sonic the Hedgehog is one of my all-time favorite video games. And it's true. And it all started that one night when he came over to my house. And the music in that game is just so memorable for me. And just the visuals, really. It's, you know, an earlier Genesis game, so the visuals are a little bit more simplistic. You can certainly see, if you play Sonic 2 or Sonic 3, you can see the like level of detail and the graphics going up and up. And so, like I said, I knew I wanted to get a Genesis for sure. And I don't remember if I started saving money or not. And that reminds me of another story I have regarding, you know, doing work with Stuart. There was this guy, another guy in Stuart's neighborhood called Mr. Reed. It's funny, I remember Mr. Reed's name. Just a second. And Stuart would do just, you know, odd jobs for Mr. Reed, like, you know, move a wood pile or cut the grass or whatever. And, you know, I was always trying to get Stuart to get me hooked up with these guys. Like, oh, does he have anything I can do? Like, try to get me, you know, like, I want to wash coffee pots too, but that was like a one-man thing, you know. But I remember one time, for some reason, Stuart wasn't going to be around, and Mr. Reed was going out of town. And I think there was a couple things I had to do at Mr. Reed's house, but one of them I remember was that he had just planted a new tree in his front yard like the week before, and so it needed to be watered constantly because it was during the summer. And so I had to ride my bike over to his house like every day and water this tree, but there must have been other things I had to do, but like maybe I had to feed his cat or something. I don't remember. But I learned a very valuable lesson from Mr. Reed, because we never discussed payment before I agreed to do the work. And then, so Mr. Reed goes on vacation for like a week. Stuart's not around. I'm riding my bike to Mr. Reed's house every single day and doing whatever it is I was supposed to do for him. And then he gets back, and then I go to meet with him and say, okay, you know, I need to get paid or whatever, you know. And he writes me a check, which, first of all, you're going to write a check to like a 13-year-old kid. And secondly, he paid me, I still remember it, $2.50. Like, I'm thinking I'm going to get like 15 or 20 bucks, because I had to go over to this guy's house every single day for like a week. And I don't know what this guy was thinking, paying me $2.50. Like, is it just because you're old and to you that's like a lot of money? I never got it. And I remember I even told Stuart, and then Stuart's like, oh yeah, he doesn't really pay very well. And I was like, oh, thanks for letting me know, you know. But yeah, I was pretty unhappy about that, because that might have been when I was saving up to get like a VGA monitor or something. I think I was saving up for some kind of computer part. Because I think this was the summer between like 8th and 9th grade. But yeah, I always remember that about friggin' Mr. Reed. But then my birthday comes around a couple of months later. And so I told my mom that, for my birthday, I wanted a Sega Genesis, and I don't remember that being super smooth. Because at this time, I want to say the Genesis was either 129 or 149. I don't remember which. But that was more than I could generally ask for like a Christmas / birthday present. Usually $100 was like the limit. But she went ahead and bought it for me. I don't know. The only thing I could think, I lost my dad at the beginning of that year, and maybe she just felt bad. I don't really know. I don't remember being like super bratty about it or anything. It was just, that's what I wanted for my birthday. And so I remember that, my mom just drove me to this. It's not like she went and got it and wrapped it up. I mean, she drove me to Circuit City. Remember Circuit City? Which was like, I don't know, like a mile from my house. It was pretty close. I don't know why Circuit City versus like Toys R Us or whatever, but she drove me to Circuit City, and we picked up the Genesis and went back, went home, and I plugged it in and played it. And I specifically remember, like, obviously it was cool to have a Genesis, and I'm not saying I have like negative associations with the Genesis, but the biggest thing I remember about that is it was the first time that I really like felt spoiled. And I mean that in a bad way. Only because, I had watched Stuart scrubbing coffee pots and saving money to buy his Genesis. And I mean, to be fair, I had done plenty of working and saving up to buy other things. But just something about the fact that he had to do all that to get his Genesis, and then all I had to do was ask my mom and she bought me one. I just remember, I felt a little bit, I don't know the right word, embarrassed or ashamed. I don't know. I still feel like that sometimes. You're more fortunate than some other people, and sometimes you see the contrast and you don't necessarily feel great about it. But I mean, it was what it was, right? And so I got my Genesis, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. I brought my Genesis here, but I meant to bring the controller over here too, but I forgot. Just because I wanted to talk about, look at it. I still think this might be the coolest looking system ever made. At least released in the US. I mean, the PC engine's cool because it's small and everything, but what a sort of avant-garde design that is. Like, what's with the dome and the vent over here? Like, it's all so like unnecessary, and it just makes it even cooler looking because they were really going for like this futuristic look. And so I remember this because I remember this from when Stuart brought it over. The headphone jack with the volume slider, that we thought that was really cool. Because it sounded so much better with headphones on, obviously, in stereo. But the fact that it had that was really cool. In fact, I bought some. I don't even know where they are, but I bought some Koss Porta-Pro headphones. I don't know, a year or two ago, specifically to use with the Genesis, just because they look so retro. But I felt the same way, about the controller, just having sort of that boomerang shaped controller that was kind of rounded off. It was a little more ergonomic. And it had 3 buttons instead of 2. And, sometimes I'll read about, people will say like, oh, the Genesis controller only had 3 buttons, and like the Super Nintendo controller had 6, and blah, blah, blah. But, if you think about when the Genesis came out in the very late 80s, it kind of made sense that the Genesis had a 3-button controller, because the Genesis was really trying to be this home arcade system. And at that time, the JAMA standard, JAMA being Japanese Arcade Machine Manufacturers Association, it was a standard for how games were going to be created for arcades. That standard was 3 buttons. And so by having that, the Genesis was kind of following the JAMA standard, which made sense because there were so many arcade conversions coming to the Genesis. But I even remember the fact that just hold on. I just gotta grab it. It's right here. So this is a later controller, so it doesn't have the red highlights on it, which kind of sucks, but whatever. But so you get the Genesis controller, and I just thought it was so cool that under the B button it says trigger. I was like, whoa, that's like the trigger. You got to remember I was 15, so I was easily amused back then. But even to this day, even though I freely admit that the 6-button controller has a vastly superior D-pad and buttons that feel better, I really prefer the 3-button controller. Now, this particular 3-button controller, which is the later iteration, like I think this might have come with a Model 2 Genesis. This actually has a much better D-pad on it. This has a D-pad that is pretty similar to the 6-button actually, but if you get an early version, it didn't feel like that. But anyway, yeah, like I just thought the system was cool. Much like Stuart, I only had Sonic the Hedgehog to start off with. But, you know, in subsequent visits to my house when Stuart would spend the night, he did get a couple more games. And I don't know exactly how he got them. It seems like he got them at school. Like, I don't know if he saved up money and was buying games used from other kids at school, or if he was maybe trading old computer parts. I have no idea. And so that's the other 2 games I wanted to talk about today. And I'm going to kind of talk about them in reverse order, just because this is the one that we didn't really care for. And so I'd rather just get it out of the way. And this might upset a few people. I don't really know. But that game is Strider. And I should say both of these games were featured in that Sega Genesis in 1990 video that I made. And I mentioned in that video that I was not really that big of a fan of Strider. And, you know, I could see someone just jumping in and saying, oh, well, you didn't play it when it came out. Or, you know, if you play it now, I don't know, people say what they want. But, you know, we were playing Strider in 1992, which, I mean, to be fair, we were playing that game like a year and a half after it came out. But we were just not impressed. Now, neither of us had ever played Strider in the arcade. In fact, I'm not even sure that I knew that it was a port of an arcade game, to be honest. I just thought, okay, it's this game called Strider. And I don't know, just both of us, we would put it in and just be like, it's okay, but we'd rather play Sonic the Hedgehog or play the other game we're going to talk about right now. And that game is Golden Axe. And unlike Strider, which we really didn't care for, Golden Axe is a game that we just couldn't get enough of. I think we ended up probably playing this game 2-player, I would guess, every time we got together. I can't think of too many cooperative, 2-player simultaneous games that we had played prior to that. And, anytime we played like a 2-player competitive game, Stuart would kick my butt just because he was better than me at video games. And so to be able to play something together was cooler. I was always the dwarf, Gilius, and he was always Axe Battler. Well, every once in a while he'd be Tyrus Flare, but usually he was Axe Battler, and I was always Gilius. Even to this day, he's the only character I really care for playing as. And I mentioned in that Sega Genesis in 1990 video that, Golden Axe has this 2-player head-to-head, like one-on-one fighting game, mini game built into it. And that, compared to something like Street Fighter 2 rather, it's not really that great of a game. But I said in that episode, once you'd gotten tired of beating the game for the umpteenth time, it gave the game some additional value. And certainly for us, like, we just had fun messing around with that. Like, we would sit down, we'd play through the entire game together and beat it. And then we would play some of the head-to-head fighting in it. And so anytime now I play Golden Axe, it takes me back to being like 15 years old and playing with Stuart. And the one thing, I think I mentioned this in a live stream. I played the game in a live stream, but a little habit that I developed playing Golden Axe that I still do to this day, just because, we were 15 years old and had, puerile senses of humor, is that between the levels, right, you're like sleeping on the ground, and then the little, what are they, like, gnomes show up and like steal your magic potions, and then you wake up and you have to kill them, right? And get your potions back and maybe get some free food. Once you did that, you had like this 3-second delay before that thing came to an end, right? Like you would freeze, and then like the screen would kind of shrink down or whatever, like blue, and then that would be the end of that. You had like 3 seconds. And so we would get right over the campfire so that our characters would spread their legs, and then we would sit there making like, oh, kind of like noises, because like the whole idea was that the fire was like burning our junk or whatever. Again, I'm not proud of it. We were 15. It was stupid, but I still do it to this day. Like I can't not do it because I don't know. It's like the force of habit. Like I'm playing Golden Axe. I get up, I get all my potions back, and then like just reflexes, I have to run over to the campfire and get as still as I can. And then I kind of judge myself on how well I did it. Like, am I really centered over the fire, or is it more like I'm singeing the hairs off of my calves or something? I don't know. And I really can't think of too many other examples in games where I still do something that's stupid to this day. The only other thing I can really think of is probably the original Super Mario Brothers, because I am still trying to jump over that flagpole. But yeah, so I don't know if that I think that might be it for today. That's the arrival of the Genesis. We were still primarily PC gamers, to be quite honest. It was more just that the Genesis got added to our gaming rotation. Like we still played NES sometimes. If we could go rent a game, or maybe I found a cheap game at KV Toys, we'd still play NES. We primarily played PC, and then we each got Genesis systems, and it was another thing that got added to the rotation. Like we got tired of playing Police Quest or something on the PC, and it's like, hey, let's go play some 2-player Golden Axe and run through that real quick. So yeah, I don't know. I know some people were like looking forward to this episode, so hopefully it lived up to the hype. I don't really know. That's my Genesis, my Genesis story. I will have other Genesis games to talk about, although I never had that many Genesis games. I rented a few and I bought a few, and for some reason, Stuart actually let me borrow Golden Axe, and he let me hang on to it for quite a bit of time before he finally asked for it back. So I played quite a bit of single-player Golden Axe as well. On the next episode of Flashback, we will not be talking about Genesis, because we will be talking about something else that I'm extremely excited about. And I'm also just going to say this so that to help me not forget. So today is June 30th. July 8th is the 6-year anniversary of the Classic Gaming Quarterly YouTube channel. Now, every single year, July 8th comes and goes, and I forget until like a month later, and I always think, oh, I should have done something for the anniversary. So it is my intention to do some kind of live stream, like a 6th anniversary live stream on the night of the 8th, which I believe is a Monday. Today is Sunday, the 30th, and I think June 8th is a week from tomorrow. So, and probably when you're watching this, maybe it's a week from today, because hopefully I'll have this episode uploaded tomorrow. So I think that's it. One last thing for anybody actually still watching this. I have not sent out any postcards in like a month. And so if you sent a postcard sometime in May or June, I'm sure I have it. I've probably already written the reply to it, but I just have a few more I need to reply to, and then I can go drop the entire stack off at the post office. So lest anybody think that they're not going to get a reply or something. Just as you guys know, I went on vacation, and then when I came back, it just took me a while to get back up to speed, which is why we're just barely getting a new episode of Flashback. So that's going to do it for this episode of Flashback. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.